So the pod spell cards are very iconic because they've always been used by pretty much every deck since the very start of the game. But of course, as we get more and more pod cards, we also get more and more options. And just because there's a lot of different pod cards doesn't mean that you should actually play all of them because they actually clash with each other. For example, if you use Pot of Prosperity, you cannot draw cards by card effects for the rest of the turn, which basically shuts down most pod cards. Pot of Extravagance has a very similar clause, but only for the rest of the turn. This means that if you can draw cards on your draw phase or standby phase with some quick effects, then you can still use Extravagance at the start of your main phase 1. Now, before I jump into the more complicated pod cards, I'll start with the niche ones first. Now, Pot of Inquisitiveness was a very obscure pod card that only really saw play during one format in the Burning Abyss Mirror match post-game 1 when people were banishing your Dantes with Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries. Acquisitiveness was basically a better call by the grave because not only would you nullify their Ghost Reaper, you would also be drawing one card. But outside of that, it ends up being a worse upstart goblin because it has a very strict activation requirement, so it's not really worth playing right now. Pot of Avarice is next in line, being very good in slow decks and slow formats. Recycling back your monsters used to be a great thing because it gave you an infinite grind game, but now it's actually seen as a bad thing because it means that you have to have 5 monsters in your graveyard preemptively, and that's actually another strict requirement. If you draw this card on turn 1, it's usually dead for a few turns because you're not really going to have much in your graveyard. I guess Sky Striker is a deck that can use this card really well because one single ray can turn into 4 different Link monsters, and then you're going to be able to actually recycle back your monsters and draw 2 cards, and recycling back your Kagaris is always appreciated. Unfortunately, I still wouldn't recommend playing this card in Sky Striker because that deck already has a good grind game, it only really suffers from the early game. And your goal is to avoid playing the win more cards, but rather fix your issues. Alright, time to get into crazy category. Pot of Desires is a very simple, yet really complicated card. I guess the effect is simple. Banish the top 10 cards of your deck face down, draw 2 cards. Banishing cards face down will pretty much always hurt you because they don't really trigger their effects when they are banished face down, they don't really have an identity, and they're really hard to recycle. But then again, if you're playing a deck like Grand Maju, the banishing cost of Desires is actually a good thing because it makes your Grand Maju gain 4000 attack. If your deck plays a huge amount of 3-ofs and not really 1-ofs, then Desires is probably the card for you. You're really down to get rid of the redundant cards to increase your likelihood of seeing the ones you really want. I want to say both Pendulum, Sky Striker, and Danger-based strategies can play Desires very well. After that is Pot of Extravagance, an extremely interesting one for sure. It is a given, of course, that this card is really good in trap decks because they don't really care about the extra decks, so it really ends up being another pot of greed for them. But of course, it has seen some play in combo decks in the past. For a very brief period of time, a Spiral deck actually used to play Extravagance, and it used to play like a bunch of 3-ofs in the extra deck and everything, but that's really the only way to make it work. If you're playing like a more aggressive deck that isn't a trap deck, the only way for Extravagance to not suck, like I said, is literally to have 5 3-ofs in your extra deck. And also, don't play a lot of cards that actually draw cards in your deck outside of Extravagance because they also conflict with Extravagance. So yeah, don't even try to play Extravagance in your Danger deck. Now, Pot of Prosperity, on the other hand, is very similar, but at the same time very different than Extravagance. Pot of Prosperity can be played in combo decks, mid-range decks, and control decks. Usually when decks cannot play Extravagance, they can always play Pot of Prosperity. And the reason for that is because with Prosperity, you get to choose which cards you banish from your extra deck face down, whereas with Extravagance, it's random. If card advantage is what you need, Extravagance is the card for you, whereas if card quality is what you need, Prosperity is the card for you. For example, in Eldritch, I don't really care about any specific card, I just want to have as many cards to play with as possible, so Extravagance is better. However, with Altergeist or Kashtira, my hand doesn't really matter too much if I don't have very specifically Multi-Faker or like Unicorn or something. So even though you can actually play both of these spot cards if you really want to, one of them is usually slightly better than the other for a trap deck. Last and absolutely not least is Pot of Duality. It's basically a baby Pot of Prosperity because instead of seeing 6 cards and choosing one, you see 3 cards and only pick one, but it doesn't have the drawback of not allowing you to draw cards for the rest of the turn or something. So Duality can actually be played in tandem with Extravagance or Prosperity. However, the drawback is huge because if you use Duality, you cannot special summon any monsters during the turn you activate Duality. This means that combo decks absolutely cannot play this card. You will usually see Flunderies and trap decks run Pot of Duality because they really do not care too much about the special summoning aspect. With that being said, I wouldn't run Duality in a deck like Trap Tricks because you're always trying to special summon Sarah in that deck. So to sum it all up, trap decks are in a privileged position because they can kind of play any pot card they want to, whereas combo decks are a little more strict with their options. And also, you really want to stay away from Avarice and Acquisitiveness. I think they're way too obscure and not really worth playing. But yeah, that's pretty much all I had to say for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.